Thank you very much. It was so good to hear Dr. Graham's voice and to see him. There's been kind of a transformation in his attitude toward this. He is such a great scientist that he's quite capable of understatement. And you need to be very careful if you're a good scientist. But I was very encouraged by his forthrightness and his concern about the fact that our country is not adequately addressing this threat. Gee, I don't know where I first heard about EMP. I've searched my memory and I don't know. But I do know that one of the first things I did after I learned about EMP was to call my friend Tom Clancy. I knew that he had an EMP scenario in one of his books, and I knew that he did very good research, and so I hoped he could tell me something about EMP. By the way, I thought I was conservative until I met Tom Clancy. He said, if you've read my book, you know as much as I know about EMP, but let me refer you to the smartest man hired by the U.S. government. They hire a lot of people, and so that's a tall order, isn't it? In his view, that was a Dr. Lowell, what's his first name? Lowell Wood from Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, that's correct. This was pre-cell phone day. Remember the old pagers up to a satellite and down? I paged Lowell Wood, and I thought I was paging him in California, and he happened to be in Washington. It still came down, and he got it in Washington. An hour later, he was sitting in my office. And we talked about EMP, and if any of you know Dr. Lowe, by the way, he has a very unique way of characterizing what EMP is. He says it's a giant continental time machine that will take us back more than a century in technology. I said, but Lowell, the technology of a century ago cannot support our current population. Yes, he said unemotionally, the population will shrink until it can be supported by the technology. I had him brief Newt Gingrich, who was just about finishing his term as Speaker. And if you've noted in his last campaign, Newt talked about EMP. Thank you, Newt. You're one of our national leaders who has the courage to talk about this. When I went to set up the EMP Commission, the chairman of the committee did not want to do it. The staff director did not want to do it. The Pentagon did not want to do it. And it was Dr. Peter Pry. He happened to be on the Armed Services Committee senior professional staff there. And Peter was helping me, and they said, gee, we really can't do that because it requires sequential referral. You see, the Armed Services bill is the first one out, and you can't have any sequential referral. That means that other committees have to also take it up, and if you're going to be the first one out of the gate, you can't have it go to other committees, and so we really can't consider that because it requires sequential referral. I said, to where? So they told me the committees it would have to go to, so I went to those committees. There were two of them, and I got a letter from the chairman of those committees waiving jurisdiction. So I took that back to them. Now they had no recourse. They, without any enthusiasm, put it in the bill, and somehow it got through the Senate, and it became law. And the EMP Commission was set up, and Dr. William Graham was the chair of the EMP Commission. And it functioned not just for 2 years, but as he pointed out, for 3 different Congresses for 6 years. Oh, gee, what was the event that wiped out any recognition of the EMP Commission's report? It came to our Armed Services Committee. There were only a few people there to listen to it. There was some major event that kind of wiped that out. I can't tell you how encouraged I am by seeing all of you here. I've been to this event for a number of years now, and every year it grows, and thank you very much. I'd like to just close with 2 little anecdotes that tell me how important this is. I'm not very good at dates, but you can get the date for this. I was in a hotel room in Vienna, Austria. It was when the 3 hostages, whatever you want to call them, that Slobodan Milosevic had were turned over to Jesse Jackson. By the way, our Secretary of State was most upset when there was a picture of Jesse Jackson standing in a circle with Slobodan Milosevic holding hands and praying. We were in a hotel in Vienna, Austria. There were 3 members of the Russian Duma there. The senior member of the Russian Duma was Vladimir Lukin, who was the ambassador to our country at the end of Bush won, the beginning of Clinton. He was a short fella with short arms, and he sat in that hotel room with his arms folded, look at the ceiling for 3 days. By the way, my seatmate on that, every day that we were there, and it was several days, was Bernie Sanders. Bernie and I were good friends, and I had lots of friends across the aisle. Maybe it was because my first degree was in theology, where I learned to love the sinner and hate the sin. Well, in those deliberations, we were talking about the resolution of the Kosovo conflict, which just a few days later was ratified by the G8. Where Vladimir Lukin sat there for these several days with his arms folded, looking at the ceiling, and finally he said, "Why did you spit on us?" And what he meant was that Clinton had said, "Gee, you're a fading power. We're the big guys now. We don't need you. Thank you. We'll handle this alone." The reality was, of course, that we couldn't because Belgrade, the only country they had confidence in was Russia. Russia told us, whatever we agree to here today, they will accept, and that turned out to be true. Vladimir Lukin went on to say, if we really wanted to hurt you, with no fear of retaliation, we'd launch an SLBM, would detonate a nuclear weapon high above your country, shut down your power grid and your communications for 6 months or so. And the head of our delegation was Kurt Weldon, whose major was in Russian studies, and he not only heard it, he understood it. He said, "Did you hear what he said?" Well, of course I heard what he said, but I didn't understand it because it was in Russian. And then it was translated, and I knew what Kurt was talking about. With no fear of retaliation. And the third-ranking communist in the country was there. His name was Alexander Shabanov. And he smiled and said that, and if one weapon wouldn't do it, we have some spares. I think then they had 7,500 spares, the number of spares they had to make this happen. Well, that's one little anecdote that I want to leave you with. When was that date? I'm not very good at dates. I'm pretty good at remembering situations, but it was when the 3 hostages were released to Jesse Jackson. And by the way, Kurt Weldon had promised the State Department he would not go to Belgrade. I had not promised the State Department I would not go to Belgrade. And because they did not want to hand the hostages, whatever you want to call them, over to Jesse Jackson. And in the room there was a personal representative of Slobodan Milosevic who was on the phone with him, talking with him, said he really needs to get rid of them. You can't imagine how concerned he is that if something bad happened to them on his watch, he would be in some problems internationally. But the other members of our delegation were concerned that if we went there, he might not have just 3 hostages, he might have several more, including members of Congress. But the Russians had told us that they would go with us. I had every confidence that we'd be perfectly safe if the Russians were there with us. One more little anecdote that tells you how serious this threat is. How many of you, by the way, I want to ask you a question. How many of you were born before 1926? My birthday was June the 3rd, 1926. So I guess I'm senior here. Thank you for recognizing that. How many of you have heard of Yamantau Mountain? Okay, a few hands have heard of Yamantau Mountain. Whatever they're doing at Yamantau Mountain is very disquieting. Let me tell you what we know about it. It is in the Ural Mountains, about 600 miles due east of Moscow. You can pull it up ask Google. Google knows about Yamantau Mountain. Will tell you. I think he'll tell you that it encompasses about 400 square miles. Now, that's not all hollowed out under the mountain, but it is as big as inside the Washington Beltway with train tracks. That we've had 2 defectors. They tell us what they know, with train tracks going in 2 different directions. It was supported by a closed city. Russia has cities that do not appear on the map. You go down the road, and there's a great big city over there, and it's not on the map. And a closed city, Meshgorod. It was in 2 valleys because one wasn't big enough to handle the city. They can't hide that from our satellites. It was probably 600,000 people. If 1 out of every 3 people is working, that meant 20,000 people working on Yamantau Mountain. That started during the days of Brezhnev. That's quite a while ago. The population is now down in Meshgorod. It's about 20,000 people, so 6,000 or 7,000 people still work on Yamantau Mountain. What is it? I had several briefings when in Congress from the CIA. I don't know how many of you know who Joel Skousen is. Joel Skousen thinks that they're building biological and chemical weapons there. I don't think that's true. Ken Alabek, remember Ken Alabek, the defector from Russia, and biopreparat, he said Russia was continuing, as I suspected they were, an aggressive program in biological and chemical weapons. They got lots of other secret sites. They don't need to be doing it under Yamantau Mountain. The last brief I had said that what it was a retreat to which the Russians would bring the cream of their civilization so that they could repopulate after a catastrophic event that wiped out almost everybody else. What in the heck is that? What do they know that we don't know? What do they anticipate that we don't know? Again, I want to thank you all very much. This is a very serious, it could end life as we know it. Remember that the Mayan civilization disappeared, a huge civilization with millions of people. It disappeared with not enough people left to tell them what happened. We're trying to figure it out from looking at the remains down there. So it's not impossible. I mean, this EMP effect is just so totally devastating. And Bill Graham is right. Their solution to the problem is ignore it, and it probably won't happen. I'm not sure that's a realistic approach to the problem. And thank you all so very, very much for your attention to this. Thank you.